kid from the bush who grew into a legend in his own lunchtime, former SAS soldier Michael J. Malone has seen it all. This is Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words, hosted by the man himself, Mick Malone, along with Toby Malone, as they examine this long, storied career in the Australian Special Forces. Join us each week for behind-the-scenes insight, exclusive readings, and brutally honest truths from a true original. Welcome to Never Die Wondering. Welcome to episode 38 of Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words, a podcast that explores the life and legend of Michael John Malone, OAM. My name is Toby Malone, Mick's son and co-host of this podcast series, joined by the man whose name is in the title, Mick Malone. G'day, Dad.
G'day, mate. You're a star of the show.
I do my best. I'm going to keep things on track and make sure that everyone gets their weekly dose of Never Die Wondering. Yes, it's always good to be able to sit down and chat about your career. And today we're going to be spending a little bit of time talking about you and the CT teams in SASR, and a little bit of insight into more of the life that's going on there in SAS. I think this is one of the things that people really enjoy about the book, is that they get this behind the scenes glimpse at some of this daily activity. So what do you remember about this time?
What do I remember? Everything.
It's impressive what you remember. Yeah.
It was such a departure from what we've been used to. All of a sudden we're wearing gas masks and rushing around with two weapons in a room combat situation, which we'd never done before. It was always in the desert or in the jungle. So this was completely new thing.
Mm-hmm.
British SAS turned it into an art form, and we were absolutely entitled. Sorry, we were absolutely convinced we were going to match them. You know, we were going to create our own art form.
And so were there threats, terrorism threats that were floating around?
Yeah, there were different Ananda Marg people. There were all sorts of weird people around the joint, but overseas mainly.
Mm.
And customers and ASIO were continually finding people coming into the country that shouldn't have been here. Yeah, we were armed for bear and ready for anything.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And this chapter is just chock full of all sorts of activity over a course of 5 years. That's going on here, with plenty of things, and good things and bad things that go on here. Obviously, we've got a little bit more loss of life that happens during this time.
Yeah.
In accidental training, things like that. But we'll get to those when we get to them. So why don't we get into the reading, because this is a longer chapter, so we don't want to spend too much time at the top. So today we'll be reading chapter 35 of Two Ranks on the Road, 35 Years of Australian Special Forces Service by Michael J. Malone, OAM, published in 2024 by Imprimatur Books, Perth. This chapter, entitled CT Teams in SASR, covers pages 251 to 264 in the print edition. The ebook may have slightly different numbering, so follow from the beginning of the chapter. As we read, the body of the text will be read by author Mick Malone. Whenever we come across a footnote, we will pause in the least disruptive way possible, and I will read the footnote. And now, without further ado, Two Ranks on the Road.
Chapter 35, CT Teams in SASR, 1979 to 1984. Crash and burn. In early 1979, the barracks was a hive of industry, and as usual, although 2 squadrons had been disbanded and the members sent to 1 and 3 squadrons.
Footnote: as many of the 2 squadron blokes were nashos and elected to leave, the system had no alternative but to disband one of the squadrons. Many thought that it should have been 3 squadron to get the chop, as it was the last squadron raised. Not entirely sure when this occurred, around about this time, but I could be wrong.
Leading up to this point, I had been promoted to temporary sergeant in December 1975 and fully fledged, substantive, in May 1976. As I qualified on a freefall course recently, I put my hand up for the troop sergeant job in A Troop 1 Squadron. I'd heard in the mess that the slot was coming vacant, with Bart Maverick's promotion to WO2 and moving to training squadron. I presumed it would be first in, best dressed, and so I hot-footed it over to 1 Squadron and presented myself to the squadron commander, Jock Murray.
Footnote: Jock's father served with my father in the Western Desert with 2nd 13th Battalion. He was NX 20884, Captain J.C. Murray.
Jock said, I'll check the COs. I'll check with the CO, but the job's yours. Once approved, I moved across to A Troop and met Andy Harris, the outgoing troop commander. This was the premier freefall troop in the regiment, as we had 4 PGIs in the troop: Aussie Power, Truck Sams, Peter Lutley, and Charlie Dice. These were serious jumpers led by Aussie and Truck, and would go on to do thousands of jumps. I made it clear that I was there to do the admin, and they were there to lead the parachuting. Andy Harris was replaced by Martin Hamilton Smith as the new troop commander, and my good self, the troop sergeant. It was sad to leave the old troop in which I had been a member since day one. The old troop had some excellent soldiers in their ranks, and I would miss them. We made Corrigan in the WA wheat belt, our home away from home. Our barracks were in the old barn at the showgrounds, and we had a Caribou aircraft parked on the strip just outside town. The crew were quartered in the local motel and did it real tough. We were there the previous year when Cyclone Alby hit the wheat belt.
Footnote: Tropical Cyclone Alby hit WA in late March 1978 and wreaked havoc across the state for nearly a week, and my very pregnant wife stayed at home to make sure the house didn't blow away.
And deposited thousands of tons of topsoil into Perth. We had 2 Caribous with us at the time, and it was a close shave getting them into the air before the storm hit. They flew to Kalgoorlie and to wait out the storm. When they returned, we resumed our jumping. We also jumped in on Lang Hancock's birthday at Learmonth RAF base near Exmouth, standing on the tarmac in full freefall rig, drinking a cold one and watching the great and good having a lovely time. During this exercise, we jumped from a USAF C-130 by day from 24,000 feet, and by night, the C-130 was fitted out with an oxygen console, which we plugged in our breathing rigs. On the order to stand up, we unplugged ourselves from the console and hooked up our personal oxygen bottles. We jumped from the ramp and were out over the wild blue yonder, looking out over the Exmouth Gulf. 3 minutes in free fall till the automatic opening device, AOD, fired. This operated under barometric pressure and was set for 3,000 feet. Under canopy for 3,000 feet was a thrill, as you could see for miles. It was then a job to land, define the DZ marker panel, and steer towards it, hoping not to crash and burn. That night we did the night jump from 24,000 feet, but it was a vastly different proposition, black as the insides of a cow's stomach, with no lights anywhere. When the AOD fired, it was all hands to the pump, searching for the DZ lights. In my time in the freefall troop, I did, as I like to say, 200 unsuccessful landings, which lent me the nickname Crash and Burn Malone. Once I hit a fence and let 300 sheep out of a paddock. Another time I landed on a road and nearly got run over by a road train. I've landed on the roofs of buildings, in a creek, and you name it. It wasn't the best role. It wasn't my best role. Soon after, I attended a Subject 1 for Warrant Officer in Canungra. It was a generally classroom orientated all core course dealing with methods of instruction, military law, mess, accounting, and various various other administrative factors, which is a vital course for Woe 2. There were many more infantry members on the course, some of whom had never. There were many more non-infantry members on the course, some of whom had never seen an M60 MG or an M16 rifle. They were required to teach stripping and assembling these weapons, but had no idea about them. We took it upon ourselves to conduct orientation lessons in the barracks hallway. Entrance fees, a six-pack of VB. Each night we would conduct a class on a particular weapon, and those designated to teach it were all there with their six-packs. We spent a lot of time at the JTC Sergeant's Mess, bar among many old AATTV members. This is where they were based during the Vietnam War, and they had a memorial in the garden. Not long later, I was selected to attend a Subject 2 course for Woe 2 at the Infantry Centre, Singleton, New South Wales. These courses involved leadership, military law, bushwork, parade ground, and various other aspects not covered to any depth in the West, and were essential to the promotion. Essential to be promoted to Woe 2. These were dreaded courses for most SAS blokes because they were generally populated by numpties from the battalions. There were many great blokes amongst them, Pete Stammers for one, and also blokes who went on my never to be caught in a lift with.
Footnote, I've got another list of people, mainly politicians, who I don't want to be caught on a bus with.
Sorry. Again, I did okay on the course and was ready for promotion to Woe 2. Back in Perth, it was great to catch up with my lovely little family again. I spent a lot of time away over these years, and Joe had already quite a trying time with two infants, exacerbated by the fact that Toby was diagnosed with asthma at 2.5, which added a whole other level of chaos to life at home. Thank heavens for mothers-in-law and close friends. It's a great memory to see the looks on Joe it's a great memory to see the looks on Joe and the kids' faces when I walked through the door. I'd like to think I was a natural family man, loving and loyal, with those attributes being returned to me. Around this time, Team 1, Gauntlet 1, based on B Troop 1 Squadron, had been chosen, led by Martin Hamilton Smith, the Alpha Alpha, with Vern Delgado as his Alpha Bravo, and Len Smith as the Alpha 1. Most of this team were chosen from A and B Troops 1 Squadron. Both teams were headquartered in the old West Block, when Prince's Gate,
Footnote, the Iranian Embassy Siege, 30th of April to 5th of May 1980.
when Prince's Gate went down, my team, Gauntlet 2, was on the E&E exercise in the Bunbury region. We just happened to be in the Bunbury drill hall and watched the assault live on TV. We were stunned by the audacity of the SAS boys and decided there and then we would try to emulate their deeds. G2 was led by Bob Quadling with Peter Byers as his Alpha Bravo and with me as Alpha 1. Pete Lutley led our Alpha 2, the immediate action team, while John Kelly led Alpha 3 and Charlie Dice Alpha 4. Our 10-man sniper team was led by the indefatigable John Juvie Matten, Sierra 1, and Norm Crookston at Sierra 2. They whipped their boys into shape in quick time. In February 1981, we were visited with another tragedy when a US C-130 crashed in the South China Sea off the Philippines while on a spec ops exercise, killing all 30 on board with only one survivor. The dead included three of our members, Ewan Big E Miller, Murray Spike Tonkin, and Greg Fry. It was an enormous tragedy to lose these three. Ewan Miller is quite important to the Malone story because without him, I would not have met my wife Joanne. He was a great mate and had performed well on Gauntlet 1 the previous year as A2. He was one of the funniest blokes I ever served with. He was larger than life personally, and the life of any party. It seemed inconceivable that he had been cut short at the age of 32, and his death hit me harder than almost any other death in my life, including that of my father. When we had had his funeral on the rugby oval at Swanbourne, there wasn't a dry eye amongst the gathering, hardened soldiers, when a small plane trailing a banner reading "Goodbye, Big E" flew across the sky above the ocean at North Cottesloe. All three are forever remembered on the SAS Memorial in Campbell Barracks, Swanbourne. RIP. Around the same time, we had a call from RSQ to take a team out to RAF Base Pierce to meet a Lufthansa plane. Laden with crates of weapons, we loaded the trucks up and drove back to Swanee, where the weapons were delivered to the main Q-store armory. The weird thing about this entire episode is the fact that customs didn't seem to be in attendance and police presence was minimal. So someone very high up obviously pulled the strings. The shipment consisted of scores of H&K MP5s in three variants, SD suppressed and short barrel briefcase model, and PSG-1 sniper rifles. Up to this stage, G1 had Tikka Finlander 5.56, which were a good bolt action rifle, but we determined we needed a semi-automatic rifle, so as a consequence, we got the H&K PSG-1. The training on these weapons was intense and conducted by TAC Wing. We became very efficient in weapon handling and were convinced we were up to speed if and when we were called upon. By the end of 1979, the indoor live firing facility, the Killing House, or KH, was finished, and G1 wasted no time in using it. As the next team to come on, we also used it. We found ourselves doing a lot of sentry duty for Team 1, which was extremely tedious. Our lives were thrown into chaos when, on the 10th of October 1980, Peter Pee Wee Williamson was shot and killed in the Killing House. It was purely an accident, an error of judgment. It was the loudest shot I'd heard, as I had my earmuffs on, filling magazines in the waiting room. Earmuffs off, filling magazines in the waiting room. The incident occurred about 4 feet from me, and my first IA was to grab the pistol off the shooter and place it on the floor and push him out the door.
Footnote: this is the changeover drill. When a stoppage occurs with the primary weapon, it is immediately discarded, and the secondary weapon, the pistol, is drawn to continue firing. However, this drill with live ammo is supposed to only occur when in the shooting rooms. It appears they were testing their slings and torches, and inexplicably the shooter drew his pistol in the waiting room and fired a single shot, hitting Pee Wee between the eyes. It was unsurvivable.
This was my four-man team, one dead on the floor and one shooter. Ironically, my fingerprints are on the weapon, as the shooter was wearing gloves. Peter By and I worked on Pee Wee for 10 minutes while we called for an ambulance. As no ambulance was coming after 10 minutes, we bundled him into a Land Rover and smashed through the locked range gate on our way to the RAP. They then took over and got him to Royal Perth Hospital, but he was pronounced dead on arrival. We were all extremely traumatised, needless to say. All of us all of our procedures were put under a very large microscope, so Pee Wee didn't die in vain. Our SOPs were dismantled and rebuilt. Safety was given a greater role than it had previously, and G2 training was suspended for a week or two. The investigation involved the police and various army officers. Everyone was interviewed, and I was asked the inevitable question: why were your fingerprints on the weapon? My explanation was accepted, and I was free to leave the interview room. It was very difficult to concentrate on anything, and I needed to get home to the arms of my family. The team was stood down for a week, but it had to be on call for if more answers were required. Poor little Pee-wee. He didn't deserve his fate like this. When the funeral eventually came round, the entire team was there in full uniform, medals and all. While G2 and many others were in deep mourning, G1 was still on beepers at 4 hours' notice to move. Their training continued apace, and we eventually picked up where we left off. By Christmas 1980, we were ready to take over, and we came online soon after the Christmas break. At the same time, the Nulla team, Water Ops, led by Graham Ferguson, Zulu Alpha, and Brew Ryan, Zulu 1, came online. They did the same training as us in G2, with the added responsibilities of everything offshore, ships alongside, ships underway, oil and gas platforms, and anything else that might be deemed appropriate, including as backup to us. 1981 was a seminal year for us. The training was fierce and relentless, with new techniques and resilience being developed continuously. Our F-100 assault vehicles got a real workout, as did our weapons.
Footnote, we had most of the 9mm ammo stock the Army had. Each man on the assault team fired about 5 magazines of 30, 5 days a week.
With 24 odd assaulters in A Troop and the same in B Troop, we cost the system millions in ammo use. Said system was quite happy to supply as much ammo as they realised we had to be on our game if the shit ever hit the fan. With the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Chogham to be held in Australia that year, the government was very cognisant of the fact of the need of a combat force above and beyond police capabilities. Both teams, G2 and N1, relocated to Canberra by two C-130s and set up in an old barracks at Fairburn RAF base. Many of the Commonwealth heads of government would be appearing in Canberra, Sydney and Melbourne, and we were to be the reaction force to supplement the police force of these cities. Liaison was a big issue. The Sydney cops reckoned they could do the job themselves and didn't need any outside interference. The Melbourne Special Operations Group
Footnote, SOG, or Sons of God, as they like to refer to themselves.
were a little more amenable to our presence. We had to recce all the venues in Melbourne that the heads would be speaking at, especially the PM of India, Indira Gandhi, who was under threat from various terrorist groups in India. We worked with Victorian Police bomb squad and crawled around all sorts of spaces in buildings, ensuring no bombs. While we were in Melbourne, we stayed in the Cecil Hotel, which was a less than salubrious establishment. Blue Rhine was a laugh a minute as usual. We did a runner from a Chinese restaurant in the city. I'd gone up to pay the bill. Bill was $30, and I handed the bloke a $50 note. Unbelievably, he handed the money back to me and said, "I no change. Wait a minute." With that, he turned around and walked up some stairs. As quick as a flash, Blue and Bob Quadling were out the door and putting the big ones in down the road. But Ferg and I were a bit slow off the mark and couldn't catch the other two. I ran a block before I was apprehended by the Asian gentleman. You no pay, he yelled. I quickly produced the 50. He gave me my change, and that was that. Ryan and Quadling were not to be seen till later that night back in the hotel room, laughing their heads off. To this day, they never paid their share of the bill. Meanwhile, back at the front, it wasn't all fun and games in these op recce's. We worked hard and achieved a high level of skills. The next full-on exercise saw us fly to Launceston, where we picked up our assault vehicles, which had been shipped across from Melbourne by car ferry and headed for Hobart, around 200 kilometres away. The exercise centred around a bunch of terrorists who had taken over a resort on the Derwent, taking numerous hostages. We established a holding area, HA, close by and prepared for action. We had police negotiators with us, and they spent a couple of days talking up, talking to the bad guys on the phone. Their demands included $1 million, a plane out of Hobart Airport, and a dozen Bowbells pies. When negotiations started to break down, we prepared for the assault. Our lead car got bogged in sand on the side of a hill, and my team, A1, roared past them and hit the target with a good level of ferocity. We swept through the stronghold and cleared the enemy out before the other teams arrived. Good work, boys. We eliminated 4 of the 5 and captured their leader. A swift kick in the turleys and down he went. The police arrived and we were ready to hand over to them. We pulled back to the holding area and prepared for our debrief. It appears the commander of the vehicle that was bogged had a serious injuries to his leg caused by a door. Apparently the driver, who shall remain nameless, had failed to engage the four-wheel drive lugs on the front wheels, thus causing the vehicle to bog. The commander was rushed to hospital and numerous stitches in his wound. We visited him the next day and he was full of beans, although he's slightly embarrassed. I can't remember if he flew back to Perth with us or came later, but it put him out of action for quite a while. The rest of the year came and went, and G3, Jeff Davies Alpha Alpha, and Reb Webb Alpha 1 prepared to take over from us. We assisted the wing on a couple of close quarter battle, room combat, and sniping courses to ensure that they were up to speed. We'd given it our best shot and developed a lot of good principles and methods, which we continued in subsequent teams. By the end of 1981, we were all very pleased to hand in our beepers. In January 1981, Joe and the kids had an opportunity to fly to Sydney on a RAF VIP flight to spend a couple of weeks with family. It turned out to be a calamitous time to be flying in Australia. While they were away, there was a major labour disruption in the airline industry and left my family stranded with my mother and father. All military personnel who had normally flown Civvy Air took up all the available seats on military flights. Kids were only 2.5 and 12 months old, and after a short time, their natural exuberance and childhood antics wore thin with my father. Poor Jo was at her wits' end and came through heroically. Eventually, after a month of all this, Jo borrowed the money from her mother to come home by Civvy Air, and they'd been gone so long I was convinced that young Georgia might have forgotten who I was. I'll never forget picking him up at Perth Airport and seeing the look on George's eyes as she recognised me, and then launched herself at me out of her mother's arms. What a relief. What a moment. In December 81, I was promoted to WO 2, and in early 82, I was posted to SSM Base Squadron. The CO Rod Curtis called me in because it was reported to him that I had an arrogance in my demeanour, far too focused on the job and discarding the human element with my fellow soldiers. Whilst he congratulated me on my focus and the work I had done in the CT squadron, he told me he was unhappy that I'd treated this as more important than anything else. So he posted me to Base Squadron to learn some humility. This was a little outside my comfort zone, as it mainly involved around administration. We had the transport yard, the mechanics, the armourers, the cooks and stewards, and medics and the main queue store to worry about. Gus Robinson was the OC, and he was an old hand from the company days, a good man to work with. First time I had an office of my own, Joe bought a dozen indoor plants and decorated the office. However, some enterprising scoundrel, who shall remain nameless, stole all the plants and placed them all around the base quadrant in areas seldom trod, where of course they will die from lack of water. This was a typical action from this pest, and the fact we served together in a three squadron in Vietnam mattered not a jot. But I moved on, and I had far more pressing issues, pressing problems to keep me focused.
Footnote, actually, I don't think I've spoken to him from that day to this.
Fairly early on in my time in Base Squadron, Gus Robinson packed his bongos and headed out the door, headed out to retire. The new OC was Brian Coulton, who'd served with 3 Squadron on our first tour in 1966. He was a different kettle of fish to the laid-back Gus Robinson. He was full of beans and very enthusiastic about almost everything. We got on quite well. In 1982 was a good year, especially for my family. Being home every night was a blessing as it took some of the pressure off Joe, and I made the most of it. Fremantle was our playground, and we visited the Freo markets every Saturday, dinner at the Roma, and a particular treat was Cicerello's and Clancy's food joint, fish joints. This idyll was soon to come to an end, as I was posted back to the CT Squadron, 1 Squadron, as SSM at the end of 82, and was nominated to do the RSM's course, Woe 1 in Singleton in 83. This is a pretty big deal for me. By the time G4 had come online, I got fairly heavily involved in their training, reporting back to the OC, Jim Wallace, on the standards and safety traditions established by Gauntlet Teams 1 and 2 were continued and developed to a high standard in some instances. Jim Wallace was now the OC of the CT Squadron and was brimming with ideas. One CT exercise called for a terrorist team to take hostages and occupy one of the admin buildings at Woomera, our old space launch facility in South Australia. The chief terrorist was portrayed by Red Webb from Tactics Wing, SASR. He took his team in by road and set up. We at this headquarters and CT Squadron, myself, Jim Wallace, Bob Kilsby, and the INT officer and the INT sergeant spent a fair bit of time planning the retrieval op. We were to go in by parachute about 10 kilometres from the target and walk in. We flew from RAF Base Pearce to South Australia, where the drop was conducted without a hitch. Once on the ground, we shook out in formation with the CT team leading. The CT team surrounded the stronghold and waited for the negotiators to complete their job. Once the assault commenced, it was all over in 10 minutes and the stronghold secured. I remember Red Webb escaped out a window completely overcome with CS gas. Paddy Basco had given me an aerosol anti-gas spray to use on anyone gas affected. I sprayed the bulk of it on Red and he recovered in 5 minutes. Miraculous stuff.
Footnote, Paddy had a plan to market his gas antidote, but the system showed little interest. Nothing more was heard. The aftermath was untidy, and I don't want to go into it. Let sleeping dogs lie.
I spent a lot of my time counselling soldiers in various matters, including family discipline.
Footnote, not that we had many incidents of discipline breaking down. If they did, it was generally handled within the troop. As B Troop, Nulla had quite a few RAN clearance drivers posted in. We expected there to be a lot of friction between the FNCs and the Pungos, but nothing ever eventuated. They were good at their diving job, and it was our role to train them in army stuff such as close quarter battle and sniping.
Family discipline and career advice, as such as the time in rank principle, where a soldier would, all things being equal, spent a minimum of 3 years in each rank on his way up to possibly RSM. Of course, there were exceptions to this rule, allowing the stars to reach the top at a greater rate.
Footnote, I was definitely not on the stars list.
We had no input into the careers of the RAN members beyond advice on their annual reports. One of the biggest aspects of the CT squadron training was the offshore ops on oil rigs off Sale in Victoria. The main thrust of this work was carried out by water ops, Nulla, troop with Gauntlet providing the backup, and land ops. We flew into RAF Base Sale and occupied a series of old buildings for the duration. Water ops had all their gear stowed at the airfield, where a squadron of RAN Westland Wessex 31B helicopters of HC 723 Squadron sat. We called these old choppers cattle trucks.
Footnote, this was part of Operation Bursa, conducted by the RAN to ensure the oil rigs remained safe. The oil rigs are a significant economic and energy asset for Australia.
The main oil rig on which we focused our attention was Halibut, an important junction rig through which all the oil from the other rigs flowed on its way to the offshore facility at Longford. Our divers, Nulla, would swim onto the rig, negotiating the very strong currents in Bass Strait, which meant some teams would be swept past and picked up by safety craft downstream, as it were. This was arduous work for the divers who, once at the oil rig, would establish a caving ladder, with which to access the cellar deck, using the most innovative telescopic poles. Once on the cellar deck and the teams consolidated, they would then work their way up to the main production desk, ready for action. In the meantime, the Gauntlet team would be aboard the Wessex, 6 troopers per chopper, and prepare for action. Once we got the signal from the divers, we would sweep in with the OC, the headquarters staff, to take over the stronghold. Each chopper would fly in and drop the operators, who spread out, checking the accommodation, workshops, and anywhere else the bad guys may be hiding. Once everything was secure, it was my job as SSM to control the chopper pad. I wore a luminescent jacket and waved each chopper in and readied their cargoes, so on until the hostages and the assault troops had been evacuated. As part of the offshore training, we were required to do Dunker training at the National Safety Council, NSC. This entailed visiting the NSC facility in East Sale to receive instruction on how to escape from a chopper that ditched in the sea. The main part of the facility was a huge water tank with a cabin of a chopper suspended above it. 4 of us at a time would board the chopper and strap in. The airframe would then be inverted and plunged into the water. The object was to remove the seatbelt and make your way out to the surface. The first effort was a bit how's your father, because I, for one, didn't take a deep enough breath and was struggling by the time I surfaced. We went through about four more times and were experts at escaping from a down chopper by the end of the day. All I could think of was, thank you, Jimmy Stewart, for sacking me off the diving course back when. It certainly wasn't my preferred environment in which to soldier. In December 1983, we had a disaster on one of the training days where a Wessex crashed on its way back from the oil rig. The OC and I were back in the lines when word came down that a chopper had ditched. We had no further info, so we jumped in the car and raced down to the RAF medical flight, expecting the worst. When we got there, we were informed the 2 men had been killed but unfortunately, none of ours. But fortunately, none of ours. Whilst we breathed a sigh of relief, we were still concerned for the two who had lost their lives. One was a crewman in the back, and the other was a young rating from the flight line who was on his first ride in the chopper. RIP.
Footnote, it turned out the crushed airframe was the only one that day not carrying SASR personnel.
All Wessex were grounded, which brought our training to a shuddering halt. We packed up all our stores, ready to return to Perth. In the meantime, the OC granted 5 days leave, which most of us opted to spend in Melbourne. In 1984, I was selected to attend the Infantry RSM's course in Singleton, the School of Infantry. We were given a few weeks to bone up on various subjects such as military law, parade ground drill, and funeral drill. With me on the course was Ken Bowen and Jim Wiltshire, and Ken was driving across in his van. I elected to go with him. We both had large steel trunks with all our clobber, starch greens, spit polished boots, which was an ideal way to getting our stuff from WA to New South Wales in good shape. It took us around 3 days to get there, camping in seedy motels on the way. We had the equivalent of two economy rail airfares, all cash in those pre-credit card days, for fuel and sustenance. So we were in pretty good shape. The course was pretty demanding with a lot of program work. Met some of the good infantry operators, such as Pete Stammers, who topped the course, Tex Weston, Ron Briaz, Dale Sales, and others. One of the few instructors was the indefatigable Joe Turra, a legend in the infantry corps. Terry O'Farrell was also on the staff, but showed um, a certain standoffish approach to us, understandably.
Footnote, Terry O'Farrell later wrote a well-regarded book on his experiences in Vietnam titled Behind Enemy Lines.
At the end, we paraded before the Director of Infantry and were sent on our way with a tick in the box. The trip back to the west was a bit of a struggle as Ken's van broke down in Adelaide and we spent a further 3 nights there while his car was being repaired. We weren't exactly close mates by this time, and a great portion of the time was spent in silence. Once back at Swanbourne, we went our separate ways, never to work together again. He was posted to SBS in the UK, and I had my eyes on the RSM SASR job in 2 years' time. However, this didn't happen, as the next cab off the rank, Chris Pennington, decided to elect discharge, throwing a complete spanner in my plans. Terry O'Farrell was the only fully qualified WO1 in our system, so he got the job. The new CO was Terry Nolan, and the two Terrys made a formidable team.
And that was chapter 35 from Two Ranks on the Road, 35 Years of Australian Special Forces Service by Michael J. Malone, as read by the author. An action-packed episode.
Yeah,
All
absolutely.
sorts of stuff going on in there. And a long one too. So thank you all for hanging in there, and well done for reading all of that. That's an epic chapter with lots of stuff happening over the course of 5 years. So Crash and Burn Malone lives, huh?
There's a good photograph of me there on page 262.
Yes. Yes, I'll hold that up to the camera here if you're watching on YouTube. Uh, it's a young man there. With so 1983, so you've been 36.
Yeah.
Yeah, young man. And then there's another photo here of you and Bob Kilsby.
Well, that's the luminous jacket I was wearing. It's a pity it wasn't in colour.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
bright.
was pink.
Yeah, waving people in. So yeah, a couple of good photos in there of things you're doing. So yeah, so Crash and Burn Malone, you You got all the stories about knocking out sheep fences and what happened after that? You have all these stories that were landing on roofs and nearly getting squashed by trucks and
Oh,
things like
I wasn't very good at this stuff, mate.
that.
Yeah. But, always survived.
Yeah.
Um, the laughter of the guys was a real catalyst, real.
Oh
Um,
well, I mean, landing on a sheep on a fence and let, letting out all the animals. It's like something out of a comedy on television or something. And
yeah.
if they told you before you jumped, we'll give you $1,000 if you can knock that fence out and let all those animals out. You couldn't have done
No.
it.
But when they get hit by a road train, that was the worst bit.
Oh, jeez. So you saw it coming along, or had you landed
Or
when you?
I can beat this bloody thing. I hit the side of the road as you went whizzing past.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, mate.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of really exciting things that are happening here, and then there's a lot of really tragic things that are in this chapter.
Yeah.
There's a lot of loss of life in this chapter. Ewan Miller is the big one,
Oh,
and so
poor old Betsy.
what are your memories of Ewan Miller as a friend
Well,
and
he was
a
the one that was a catalyst in me meeting your mother.
yeah.
Um, he was so funny, old Big E. Uh, he told me one day he got his father caught him piddling in the sink in the bathroom. He gave him the high.
Yeah.
No,
So
he was fun. He was just a fun guy. He served with one squadron in Vietnam, and I met him after we all came home after the regiment came,
hmm.
complete regiment again.
Yeah.
Just,
Well, and
but
the
he was a doorman down at the Cottesloe nightclub that I used to take your mother to
right.
before I announced that I didn't like to go dancing anymore.
Yeah, and then the loss of life in a plane crash like that, so it's so sudden. It's
Well,
yeah.
the story is interesting. They they picked up the patrol. There were two black Hercs. These were the surreptitious sort of night Hercs run by the spooks. There were two of them churning and burning on the strip, and one patrol, Ewan Miller's mob patrol, got on the first Herc. I think he had him and two others plus three Americans in his patrol. Reg Ellison's patrol came running up to the back of the plane, and the loadmaster waved him off and said, "Go to the other one."
Hmm.
So Reg and the boys ran around and got in the second one. The first one crashed, of course, killed
Right.
everyone.
Huh.
The one bloke that survived, though, he was the navigator, and as the plane flew out over Subic Bay, um, really low, so low its wing hit the water. This bloke pencil had rolled off his navigation desk, and he was bending down to pick it up, and the plane hit the water, and he was ejected out of the plane somehow and picked up by a Filipino fishing boat. Unbelievable. You'd have to go and buy lottery tickets, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Jeez.
But it was just awful, awful to lose that many men, but three of ours.
Yeah. Yeah, and the worst that was I guess the worst one until the Black Hawk disaster in
Yeah.
1997.
Two of
Which
those guys appear in my book on wild men of the SAS.
yeah.
Ewan and Spike Tonkin,
Right.
who was a little wild man.
Hmm.
The other guy was a huge 6'3" signaler. He was a calm and quiet man, so he doesn't appear in the book.
Right. And
Poor old
then
Greg.
and then when we're talking about tragedies, then Pee Wee Williamson was also another one of those sort of one in a
Ah,
million moments, and
losing Pee Wee was so bad.
probably something you can still see in your mind's eye when as you sit there.
Yeah. No, it was awful. At the end of the day, we're not on here, are we?
Yeah,
I mean, recording.
yeah, yeah. We're recording, so
Okay. I was
don't say anything you don't want out there. But
going to say something, but I won't.
no, no. Like, and in the end, I mean, we're trying to sort of give a little bit of extra context to the book, but please
Yeah,
don't say
yeah,
anything that you feel as though will be controversial or difficult.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, a very um, yeah, I mean, one of those incidents that I heard about a lot when I was a kid, um, and it's sort of unimaginable for most people to think of
Ah,
you going through that.
even unimaginable to me today.
Yeah.
There's been some terrible loss of life in my lifetime.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a tough one. And then,
Yeah,
yeah, and then I mean, and there's a couple of examples in this chapter of men dying on operation, the helicopter crash, um, later on in the chapter, and like we said earlier on when we talked about Burma Milan, it is very much part of the risk that you take when you do your training in this way,
yep.
and so that's that's tough. And as we wrap up, I just wanted to talk about the RSM SASR position that you're gunning for. And that must have been a real kick in the guts to miss out on that just by technicality.
It was, but Terry O'Farrell was a good RSM,
Hmm.
and uh, and I got tapped on the shoulder to go to the Commandos as RSM fairly soon after that.
Right.
So I was pretty happy.
Yeah.
Uh, we were still at Duntroon, of course, when this all occurred.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Although this was,
Coming
yeah,
home to watch my son rush around the rugby field.
I wasn't much of a rugby player at that point. I got better later on.
Derrimale under sevens.
Yeah. 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 I got better. I got better later on.
Oh, you did your best, mate.
Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, lots in that chapter, and lots of tough memories and good memories and good mates and different things. But that's what this book's
Yeah.
all about. So plenty plenty ahead. So um, that is all the time we have this week for Never Die Wondering. So join us next week for the next installment in our exploration of Mick Malone's career as we get into the 36th chapter of the book itself, entitled RMC Duntroon. If you have a copy of Two Ranks, read along with us. I've been Toby Malone, and thank you to Mick Malone for expertly joining me on this journey.
My pleasure, mate.
This has been Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words. For links to purchase your own copies of Mick's books, visit the show notes or mickmalone.com.au. This podcast is produced by Toby Malone, Joe Malone, and Mick Malone, and engineered by Toby Malone. Theme music is The Happy Wanderer, the official SAS march, as reimagined by Cormac Malone and Meg Logue Malone. Yes, this is a family affair. This is a GM production in association with Imprimatur Books.